Namaskaromi. Welcome to a video series that we've put together to supplement your journey through Asia to 10 traditions of yoga. So, I thought we could begin by doing a kind of thought experiment. I'd like for you just now to close your eyes, clear your mind of all its thoughts. Right? Be at peace with yourself. Take a deep breath. Now, imagine with your mind's eye, imagine a yogi. Try to picture who they are, what they look like, what they're doing, what they're wearing. Try to picture what they're hoping to achieve by doing yoga. Now try to think about where they are. Now take that picture and with your mind's internal camera, take a snapshot of what you see, kind of file it away for later. Maybe write down a description of your yogi. Maybe draw a picture if you can draw a picture. You can also find a picture on the internet of somebody who comes close to what you just imagined for yourself. But whatever you do, keep a record of this yogi who's in your head. The aim of our journey that we're about to go on for the next 3 months is to try to figure out where that image in your head of this yogi came from. Now, for some of you, it might have come through what's known as transnational yoga practice. These are the studio-based classes that you can take at like Y Yoga or Steve Nash or other yoga studios all across Vancouver and New York, Beijing, London, Seoul, wherever you are. Right? For others, your picture of the yogi might be coming from pop culture, from movies or TV, music festivals, maybe the internet in general. Maybe for some of you, your picture of a yogi comes from studying Indian philosophy or religion or other such subjects. And for others, maybe your picture is coming from years of experience with your parents, your grandparents, your cousins, your neighbors, teachers, gurus, right? In other words, you might be culturally immersed in yoga already. Now, no matter which one of these applies to you, or maybe you're actually a different one altogether, the way that this picture has formed in your head, and in my head, and in everyone's head, is through a kind of cultural tradition. In other words, you didn't just make up that yogi entirely. You weren't faking your yogi. You got the image of what a yogi looks like, what they do, why they do it, from some earlier source. And that earlier source got it from an earlier source, and so on and so forth. That's tradition. What we're going to be doing in this course is to try to figure out how and why that image of the yogi got into your head. In other words, we're going to learn of the growth and development of the different traditions of yoga. Not a single, authentic, true yoga, but many different pathways through which yoga has been practiced, passed onwards, and has traveled all around the world. These days you can see some kind of yoga being practiced in, I would say, practically every corner of the world. And it's fostered this massive multi-billion-dollar global industry. But where does this yoga come from? How did it get here? These are the questions that we're going to be focusing on for the next 3 months. Now, in the rest of this video, what I thought is that in order to get our exploration started, I thought I could give you kind of a brief set of answers to those questions, at least from the point of view of current scholarship. As we go along, you might undoubtedly come up with your own answers to these questions, your own ideas and impressions that are coming from your own unique, very valid perspectives. The way I see it is that your perspective is not any lower or higher than my perspective or anyone else in the course. We're all just in here trying to learn from each other, so let's keep that in mind. On that note, maybe it's worth taking a second to explain who I am talking to you. My name is Adish Sathe. I teach Sanskrit literature, folklore, pre-modern South Asian cultural history at UBC. I'm especially interested in how literature, performance, and other kinds of cultural expression create spaces where social, religious, and other identities can be negotiated. My own personal journey, I guess, begins with my parents, who are from the city of Pune in Maharashtra in Western India. I was born in the US. I grew up in the state of Kentucky and went to Chicago for undergrad, where I was a math major. Then I moved to California and pivoted into studying Sanskrit in graduate school at Berkeley. Eventually, I found my way to Vancouver, where I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to do this for a living. I should make it clear at the start that I am not a yogi, at least not yet, and I'm no kind of spiritual guru. If you're looking for a class to learn how to do yoga, or if you're in search of spiritual guidance, I'm going to be useless for you. But I can help you read ancient and medieval texts about yoga to kind of make sense of them and to try to understand how these ancient traditions of yoga might have become connected to the new yoga traditions that surround us today. So, how do these two things connect? How does the yoga of pre-modern India turn into the global yoga of today? As a kind of preview of the course, let me try to give you a very, very short summary of 3 different stories that are involved. And these are based on the readings for this week by Andrea Jain, Mark Singleton, Elizabeth D. Michelis. The first story of how yoga came into being is an ancient story that happened before the year 1000, during which time a classical school of yoga philosophy formed in India. There's a lucrative symbolic artifact from about 2500 BC known as the Yogi seal or Pashupati seal, which is found in the very oldest layer of South Asian cultural history, the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization. As you can see, it looks like it's an ascetic seated in a yoga posture, but as the scholar Jeffrey Samuel points out, we actually have no idea at all how this image was used, what it meant, what it symbolized. So we can't really verify that the fellow is actually doing spiritual yoga practices. It looks like it, maybe, but so would anybody who's just sitting cross-legged. The earliest verifiable evidence about yoga as a system of practice comes from the late Vedic period, which is around the 3rd century BC, in a set of early Indian philosophical texts called the Upanishads. One of the main goals of these texts is to offer a theory of what philosophers call soteriology, how to be liberated. In Christianity and in other Western religions, soteriology involves salvation through the grace of God. Right? In Indian philosophy, due to the centrality of the idea that after you die, your soul is reborn in a new body, the idea of soteriology now becomes an idea of being liberated from that cycle of rebirth, which is called samsara. And that samsara is spurred on by what's called karma, actions that lead to future consequences and that keep you trapped. A few Upanishads explain how an individual can find liberation for one's soul, free it from that cycle of rebirth through practicing yoga and through controlling your mind, your breath, your body, and then therefore avoiding the negative consequences of karma. We won't have time to actually investigate the Upanishads in this course. You can do it in other courses, but we'll look at a later text called the Bhagavad Gita, which was composed around 100 to 200 CE, where it synthesized and expanded the Upanishads' ideas about yoga, reconciled them with another philosophical system known as Sankhya, as well as a mainstream Hindu idea called bhakti, or devotion to God. After the Gita, around the year 250, we see the appearance of what are called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And these served as the core foundational doctrines for a formal philosophical school known as Yoga with a capital Y. This school had important conversations with other philosophical schools in India at the time, including maybe most profoundly Buddhist and Jain thinkers. The basic idea of yoga philosophy was to figure out how a practitioner could liberate themselves from negative karmic consequences and thereby reach liberation through a kind of extreme self-control of body, breath, mind. Our second story about where yoga comes from takes place in those medieval times in India, basically the years between 1000 to 1800. This is when that earlier philosophical school of yoga with a capital Y takes on different practical dimensions. We see the development of a tradition known as Hatha Yoga, yoga by force. The idea was to develop different practical ways to achieve that ultimate self-control through purification of our physical and subtle bodies. Mark Singleton explains how there were 4 such domains of Hatha Yoga practice: cleansing the insides of your body, the Shatkarmas, seated postures or asanas, breath control, pranayama, and mudras or bodily seals or grips of a sort. Hatha Yoga is a kind of fuzzy and fluid history. It's very complex and seems to have arisen in North India out of deep engagements between an esoteric spiritual order known as the Naths, Tantric Buddhism that came from Tibet, Sufis, Vaishnava devotional movements, other spiritual communities in the countryside. Our third story of where yoga comes from is a modern story. It takes place in the colonial period in India in the 1800s. It's still going on today in our globalized, media-driven, and commercialized world, where yoga can be found in movies, TV, shopping malls, music festivals, right? Every part of the world. This is the story of yoga as a studio-based form of exercise, wellness, spirituality. As Singleton says, the idea of modern yoga is mostly focused on just those postural aspects of that older Hatha Yoga tradition, the asanas, and as such is not the outcome of a direct and unbroken lineage from that Hatha Yoga tradition. Instead, he explains that what goes on in your yoga class, in your studio, emerged from a moment of what he calls radical innovation and experimentation that took place during India's encounter with modernity in the 1800s, when India was colonized by the British. During this time, as we'll see, there were both Westerners who were looking towards India for kind of mystical and spiritual inspiration, and also progressive modern thinkers and gurus in India who were reshaping older ideas and practices of those renunciants and spiritual seekers from the past into something that could also serve as a modern wellness practice for regular people living in modern India. The result was a product that was exportable, and it did get exported outside of India, all over the world. Dee Michelis says in her landmark book about modern yoga that we can now think of the traditions of postural yoga that you see in the studios as being a graft of a Western branch onto the Indian tree of yoga. Now, for the next 3 months, I'm very excited to have you join me as we kind of listen in more depth to these stories of where yoga comes from. For the next month, we'll actually start with the story of this modern studio-based yoga and find out where it comes from. Then we'll jump into the earliest story of yoga as that formal school of Indian philosophy, yoga with a capital Y. Then we'll get to the story of its medieval inflections in the Hatha Yoga and how it was intertwined with an esoteric set of practices known as Tantra. And finally, in the last month of the course, we'll look at what yoga scholars do, right? Why they study the textual, cultural traditions of yoga. And throughout it all, we will hopefully share glimpses of local yoga traditions that are happening right here, right now, all around us in Vancouver and around the world. I hope you will also feel comfortable to share your own personal traditions of yoga with each other, and that way it'll become a truly memorable experience. So thank you for choosing to take this course. I look forward to learning from all of you as we embark on this journey through the traditions of yoga. Dhanyavadaha. See you next time.